The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine fairways of Westfield Country Club as I walked beside my father toward the first tee, our footsteps muffled by the perfectly manicured grass that had been maintained to championship standards for over a century. At 67, Dad moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 40 years perfecting his golf swing, his weathered hands gripping his vintage clubs with the familiarity that comes from countless rounds on courses far less exclusive than this one. "You don't belong at this country club, sweetheart," Dad whispered as we approached the group of distinguished gentlemen gathered around the tee box, their voices carrying the confident tones of men who'd never questioned their right to be anywhere. I adjusted the strap of my golf bag and smiled at Thomas Stone, the man who'd raised me to believe that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle, even if he couldn't quite see that I'd already overcome more obstacles than he realized. "I know, Dad," I said quietly. "But it's your birthday tournament. I belong wherever you want me to be." Dad's 67th birthday golf tournament had been planned for months, a celebration that brought together his closest friends, business associates and family members for 18 holes at one of Connecticut's most prestigious private clubs. The tournament was his annual tradition, a chance to combine his love of golf with his love of bringing people together, even if the venue made him slightly uncomfortable. "I still can't believe Jim Morrison sponsored us for the day," Dad said, nodding toward his longtime friend who was adjusting his clubs nearby. "This place probably costs more per round than I used to make in a week." Jim Morrison owned a successful insurance agency and had been Dad's friend since high school. He was also a member of Westfield Country Club, which had allowed him to arrange today's tournament as a gift for Dad's birthday. The gesture was generous, but it also highlighted the economic differences that had always existed within their friendship group. "It was thoughtful of him," I agreed, watching the other players prepare for their rounds. "Thoughtful and expensive," Dad muttered. "Look around, Patricia. Everyone here drives cars that cost more than my house. They wear golf clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. This isn't our world." Our world. Dad had spent his entire career as a high school mathematics teacher, supplementing his income during summers by working construction jobs and giving private tutoring lessons. He'd raised 3 children on a teacher's salary, providing a loving home and a solid education while never quite achieving the financial security that would have allowed him to join clubs like Westfield. "Maybe it could be our world," I said gently. "Patricia, be realistic. Country club membership here costs $40,000 per year, plus initiation fees that run over $100,000. That's more than I made in my first 3 years of teaching combined." "I know the membership costs, Dad." "Then you know why we don't belong. We're guests today, which is wonderful, but let's not pretend we're anything more than that." I wanted to tell him that I'd been reviewing the club's financial statements for the past 6 months, that I knew exactly what membership cost because I'd been analyzing every aspect of the club's operations in preparation for the acquisition I'd completed just 1 week ago. But Dad had no idea about my real financial situation, and today wasn't supposed to be about business revelations. "Good morning, Tom." Jim Morrison approached us with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely excited to share his favorite place with his closest friends. "Ready for the best golf course in Connecticut?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Dad replied, though I could hear the note of insecurity in his voice. "This place is incredible, Jim. Thank you again for arranging this." "My pleasure. It's not often I get to show off for you guys." Jim gestured toward the clubhouse, a magnificent stone building that had been designed by Stanford White in 1923. The course was redesigned by Tom Fazio in 2015. "Every hole is a work of art. Every hole probably costs more to maintain than most people spend on their entire yards," Dad said with a rueful laugh. "Well, you get what you pay for," Jim replied diplomatically. "Patricia, I'm glad you could join us today. Your father talks about you constantly." "Thank you for including me, Mr. Morrison. Please call me Jim. And I have to say, I'm impressed that you took time off work for your father's birthday. Not many consultants can afford to take Saturday away from their clients." "Consultant. That's how my family described my work to their friends, a vague term that covered the reality of what I actually did without requiring detailed explanations that might raise uncomfortable questions. Dad knew I worked with businesses and made a decent living, but he had no idea about the scale or success of Stone Capital Management, the private equity firm I'd built over the past 8 years. "Family comes first," I said simply. "That's the right attitude. Tom, you raised a good daughter." I raised a daughter who works too hard and doesn't spend enough time on herself, Dad corrected with parental concern. Patricia lives in a tiny apartment in Boston, drives a car that's older than some of my students, and hasn't taken a real vacation in years. The tiny apartment was actually a 3,000 square foot penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor that I'd purchased for $4.2 million 3 years ago. The old car was a restored 1967 Porsche 911 that I'd bought at auction for $850,000 because I preferred classic automobiles to flashy new ones. And my last vacation had been a month-long trip to New Zealand, though I'd worked remotely for part of it, so Dad probably didn't count it as a real vacation. Consultants have to hustle, Jim said knowingly. Feast or famine business model. Exactly, Dad agreed. That's why I keep telling Patricia she needs to find something more stable. Maybe teaching like her old man. Steady paycheck, good benefits, summers off. Teaching. Dad had suggested this career path approximately once per month for the past 5 years, convinced that his daughter was struggling in the uncertain world of independent consulting when she could have the security and respectability of education. Teaching is a noble profession, I said diplomatically. It's a practical profession, Dad corrected. Look around here, sweetheart. These men didn't build their wealth by taking risks on unstable careers. They found solid, reliable ways to make good livings. I looked around at the other members of Dad's tournament group, Jim with his insurance agency, Bob Peterson who owned a small chain of hardware stores, Mike Sullivan who'd spent 30 years as a corporate accountant before retiring, and Frank Martinez who ran a successful plumbing business. They were good men who'd built comfortable lives through hard work and smart choices, but none of them operated at the level I'd achieved. You're right about taking calculated risks, I said. There's nothing calculated about the consulting business, Dad replied. 1 month you have clients, the next month you don't. No security, no predictable income, no benefits. That's not a way to build a life. Some consultants do very well for themselves, Jim observed. Some do, Dad acknowledged. But Patricia's not at that level yet. She's still building her client base, still figuring out how to make it work long term. Still building my client base. If only he knew that Stone Capital Management currently managed investment portfolios worth over $2.8 billion, or that our client list included some of the most successful entrepreneurs and family offices in New England. Building a consulting practice takes time, I said. Which is why I worry about you, Dad continued. You're 34 years old, Patricia. At some point you need to think about stability, about having enough money to buy a house, start a family, build something lasting. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our caddies, young men in crisp white uniforms who would carry our bags and provide course guidance throughout the round. Westfield Country Club maintained traditions that had largely disappeared from public golf courses, including a caddy program that employed local college students during the summer months. Good morning, gentlemen, said the head caddy, a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. I'm Kevin and I'll be coordinating your group today. Are you familiar with the course layout? First time for most of us, Jim replied. Tom here is the birthday boy. This is his first round at Westfield. Excellent, sir. You're in for a treat. The course is in perfect condition and the weather couldn't be better. As we prepared for the first tee, I noticed Dad taking in every detail of the experience. The immaculate condition of the tees, the strategic placement of sand traps and water hazards, the backdrop of rolling hills that had been preserved in their natural state since the club's founding. This is incredible, he said quietly. I can see why people pay so much to be members here. Just enjoy it, Dad. It's your day. I'm enjoying it, but I'm also remembering my place. We're visitors here, Patricia. Guests. These people are being very gracious, but we shouldn't forget that we don't actually belong. Don't actually belong. The phrase stung more than Dad realized, not because I felt excluded, but because I knew something he didn't, that as of last week I belonged here more than anyone else on the course. The first hole was a par 4 with a slight dogleg right, requiring a precise drive to avoid the bunkers that guarded the left side of the fairway. Dad's swing was smooth and practiced, sending his ball about 220 yards down the middle of the fairway, exactly where he'd intended it to go. Nice shot, Tom, Mike Sullivan called out. You've still got it. 40 years of weekend golf, Dad replied with satisfaction. Some things become muscle memory. As we walked down the fairway, Jim fell into step beside me. Your father's quite a golfer. He should play courses like this more often. He'd love to, but country club golf is expensive. I understand. That's why today is special. A chance to experience something he normally couldn't afford. Normally couldn't afford. The assumption was natural given Dad's background and lifestyle, but it highlighted how little anyone knew about my actual financial situation. It's generous of you to arrange this, I said. Tom's a good friend. He's been there for me through some difficult times over the years. This is the least I can do. We played the first 9 holes with the comfortable camaraderie of people who'd known each other for decades. Dad's game was steady if not spectacular, and I managed to keep pace despite being the only woman in the group. The conversation ranged from golf to family to retirement plans, with the easy familiarity of men who'd shared similar life experiences. At the turn, we stopped at the halfway house for refreshments and a chance to review our scores. Dad was having one of his better rounds, shooting just 2 over par on the front 9. You're playing great golf today, I told him as we sat on the terrace overlooking the 10th tee. This course brings out the best in everyone, he replied. When everything around you is perfect, the conditions, the maintenance, the atmosphere, it's easier to focus on your game. Maybe you should consider joining a club like this. Dad laughed, the sound carrying a note of wistfulness. Patricia, we've been through this. Clubs like Westfield are for people with serious money. Corporate executives, successful entrepreneurs, people who can write a check for $50,000 without thinking twice about it. What if money weren't an issue? But money is always an issue for people like us. That's reality, sweetheart. We work hard, we save what we can, we enjoy occasional treats like today, but we don't pretend to be something we're not. Something we're not. I wanted to tell Dad that I wrote checks for $50,000 several times per month, that money hadn't been an issue for me in over 5 years, that I could afford to join every country club in New England if I wanted to. But I also knew that revealing my success would change everything between us, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for that conversation. The back 9 proved more challenging than the front, with longer holes and more complex pin placements that tested even the most experienced players. Dad continued to play solid golf, but I could see him becoming more aware of the differences between his equipment and that of the other players. Look at Bob's new driver, he said quietly as we waited on the 14th tee. That club probably costs more than I spend on golf in an entire year. Bob Peterson was indeed carrying a state-of-the-art driver that had likely cost over $1,000, part of a complete set that probably represented a 5-figure investment. Equipment doesn't make the golfer, I said. No, but it doesn't hurt to have the best tools available. Look at my clubs. Some of them are older than you are. Dad's clubs were indeed vintage, well-maintained but clearly from another era of golf technology. He'd purchased the set in 1987 and had been using them ever since, adding only a few newer pieces over the years when his old ones became too worn to use. Those clubs have served you well. They have, but I can't help wondering what it would be like to play with modern equipment on a course like this on a regular basis. What would it be like? Like a dream come true, he said simply. But dreams and reality are different things. As we approached the 18th hole, I noticed increased activity around the clubhouse. Staff members were setting up what appeared to be a small podium near the green, and I could see several club officials gathering in the area. What's all that about? Dad asked Kevin, our caddy. End of round ceremony, sir. The club president likes to welcome special tournament groups, especially when there are guests who might be interested in membership. Interested in membership. If only they knew. The 18th hole at Westfield was a spectacular par 5 that played uphill toward the clubhouse, with water hazards on both sides of the fairway and a large green that required precise approach shots. It was designed to be both beautiful and challenging, a fitting conclusion to one of the finest golf courses in the region. Dad's drive on 18 was perhaps his best of the day, a towering shot that carried over 240 yards and left him in perfect position for his second shot. As we walked up the fairway, I could see him savoring every moment of the experience. This has been an incredible day, he said. I can't thank Jim enough for making this possible. You've played great golf, Dad. You belong on courses like this. I've enjoyed great golf, he corrected. But belonging is something different. Look around. Every person here is comfortable spending more on golf than I spend on my car. That's not my world. As we completed our putts on the 18th green, The club president, Robert Hamilton III, approached our group with the kind of polished smile that comes from decades of greeting members and guests at exclusive venues. "Gentlemen and lady," he said with a slight nod in my direction, "I hope you've enjoyed your round at Westfield today." "It's been magnificent," Dad replied. "Thank you for allowing us to play your beautiful course." "Our pleasure entirely. Before you head to the clubhouse for lunch, I'd like to make a brief announcement about some exciting changes happening here at Westfield." The other members of our group gathered around the small podium that had been set up near the green. I noticed several club staff members and other golfers approaching to listen to whatever Hamilton had to say. "As many of you know," Hamilton began, "Westfield Country Club has been family-owned since its founding in 1923. The Henderson family has been wonderful stewards of this property for nearly a century." Dad leaned over to me and whispered, probably announcing some renovation project that'll cost millions. "However," Hamilton continued, "changing times require new approaches to club management. Last week, the Henderson family completed the sale of Westfield Country Club to Stone Capital Management, a private equity firm based in Boston." Stone Capital Management. I felt Dad's eyes on me as Hamilton continued speaking, but I kept my expression neutral. "Please welcome our new owner, Ms. Patricia Stone, who purchased the club for $28 million last week and has committed to maintaining Westfield's traditions while investing in improvements that will benefit all our members." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Dad staring at me, could see the confusion and dawning realization on his face as he processed what he'd just heard. "Ms. Stone has been playing with us today as part of the birthday celebration for her father, Thomas Stone, and I'm delighted to say that she's committed to preserving everything that makes Westfield special while ensuring our continued excellence for generations to come." Dad's golf club slipped from his hands and clattered onto the green. "Patricia," he said weakly, "did he just say you bought this country club?" "Yes," I said quietly. "For $28 million? "Yes. My daughter, who I've been telling doesn't belong at country clubs, owns this country club?" "As of last Friday, yes." The gathering crowd was applauding politely, but I was focused entirely on Dad's face as he tried to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about my life and career. "Stone Capital Management," he said slowly. "That's your consulting company?" Stone Capital Management is a private equity firm that acquires and manages luxury hospitality and recreational properties. We currently own 17 golf courses, 12 hotels and 8 resort properties across New England. 17 golf courses, Dad repeated. "Including 3 other country clubs in Connecticut, 2 in Massachusetts and 1 in Rhode Island." "You own country clubs?" "Multiple country clubs." "Among other things, yes." Hamilton was still speaking to the gathered crowd, explaining the transition plans and introducing me as the new owner, but Dad wasn't listening to any of it. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Patricia," he said, his voice barely audible, "how much money do you have?" I looked around at the crowd of golfers and club staff who were celebrating the announcement, at the magnificent clubhouse that now belonged to me, at the perfectly maintained course where I'd just played 18 holes with my father. Stone Capital Management manages assets worth approximately $2.8 billion. My personal net worth is around $340 million. $340 million, Dad whispered. "As of the last quarterly valuation, yes. You're worth $340 million and you've been letting me worry about your financial stability for years? You've been worrying about what you perceived as my financial stability. I never asked you to worry. But why didn't you tell me? Why let me think you were struggling with your consulting business when you actually own a private equity empire?" Before I could answer, Hamilton approached us directly, clearly wanting to facilitate introductions between the new owner and the day's guests. "Mr. Stone," he said warmly, "you must be incredibly proud of your daughter's achievements. Stone Capital Management has an excellent reputation in the hospitality industry." "I'm still learning about my daughter's achievements," Dad replied honestly. "Well, you'll be pleased to know that Ms. Stone has committed to significant capital improvements over the next 2 years. New irrigation systems, expanded practice facilities, renovated locker rooms, everything needed to maintain Westfield's position among the finest clubs in the region." "How much in improvements?" Dad asked weakly. $12 million over the next 24 months, I answered. We want to preserve the club's character while ensuring it meets contemporary standards for luxury amenities. $12 million in improvements, Dad said to himself. Plus we're expanding the membership to include more families and young professionals, I added. Country clubs need to evolve to remain viable. Your daughter has a clear vision for the future of private club management, Hamilton said approvingly. We're fortunate to have Stone Capital Management as our new owner. As Hamilton moved on to speak with other guests, Dad and I found ourselves alone near the 18th green, the site of what had been one of the most shocking revelations of his life. Patricia, I need to sit down, he said, looking around for one of the benches that overlooked the green. We walked to a quiet spot where we could talk privately, away from the celebration that was continuing around the clubhouse. $340 million, Dad said again, as if repetition might make the number make sense. Dad, I know this is a lot to process. A lot to process? Patricia, I've spent years worrying about your career prospects, your financial security, your ability to build a stable life. Meanwhile, you've been quietly building a business empire worth billions of dollars. I've been building a business I'm passionate about, using skills I developed through years of studying finance and investment management. Skills you developed where? You studied mathematics in college just like me. I studied mathematics as an undergraduate, then got my MBA from Wharton, then worked for Goldman Sachs for 3 years before starting Stone Capital Management. You have an MBA from Wharton? Class of 2013. I specialized in private equity and mergers and acquisitions. And you worked for Goldman Sachs? In their private wealth management division. I learned how to manage large investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the golf course that his daughter now owned. Why didn't you tell me any of this? He asked finally. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I've achieved. Because I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed without anyone being able to say I made it because of family connections or advantages. We don't have advantages, Patricia. I'm a high school math teacher from a working-class family. Exactly. Which means everything I've accomplished is based purely on my own abilities and decisions. But you let me think you were struggling. You let me offer you money, suggest you find a more stable career, worry about whether you could afford basic necessities. I let you be a father who cared about his daughter's welfare. That's actually something pretty special. Even when that father was completely wrong about his daughter's situation? Especially then. Dad, you raised me to work hard, to be independent, to solve problems through analysis and careful planning. Everything I've achieved in business comes from lessons you taught me. Lessons about math and logic, not about buying country clubs. Lessons about understanding complex systems, identifying patterns, making decisions based on data rather than emotion. That's exactly what private equity requires. Dad stood up and walked to the edge of the green, looking back toward the clubhouse where staff members were still busy with the celebration of the ownership change. So this morning when I was telling you that you didn't belong at this country club, you were talking to the person who owns this country club. And when I was explaining that we're not the kind of people who can afford memberships at places like this, you were talking to someone who could buy memberships at every country club in Connecticut and not notice the expense. And when I was worried about your financial future, you were talking to someone who's already secured financial futures for multiple generations of our family. Dad started laughing, but it was the kind of laughter that comes when life becomes so surreal that humor is the only reasonable response. My daughter, the country club owner, he said, shaking his head. Your daughter who learned everything she knows about problem solving from watching you teach mathematics for 40 years. Mathematics doesn't typically lead to owning golf courses worth $28 million. It does when you apply mathematical thinking to financial markets and investment opportunities. And you've been doing this for how long? 8 years. I started Stone Capital Management when I was 26, using savings from my Goldman Sachs job and a small business loan. A small business loan that became a $2.8 billion company. A small business loan that became the foundation for building something I'm passionate about. Dad walked back to where I was sitting and looked directly at me. Patricia, are you happy? Really, truly happy with this life you've built? I thought about my daily routine, analyzing investment opportunities, working with property managers to improve our holdings, traveling to visit our various properties, building a company culture where talented people could do meaningful work. I love the challenge of identifying undervalued assets and turning them into something special. I love working with teams of people who share my vision for hospitality excellence. And I love being able to create experiences like this golf course that bring joy to people who appreciate quality. Like today. Like every day. Dad, I get to spend my time making beautiful places even more beautiful, creating jobs for hundreds of people, and building value for investors who trust me with their capital. And making enough money to buy country clubs on impulse. I didn't buy Westfield on impulse. I spent 6 months analyzing their financial statements, evaluating their market position, and developing improvement plans. This was a carefully considered business decision. That also happened to be the country club where your father was playing his birthday golf tournament. I smiled at him. That was a happy coincidence that made the acquisition even more meaningful. Happy coincidence, Dad repeated. My daughter accidentally bought the country club where I was worried about not belonging. Your daughter bought a property that she knew would give her father the golf experience he deserves to have on a regular basis. On a regular basis? Dad, you're now a lifetime honorary member of Westfield Country Club. You can play here whenever you want, bring guests, use all the facilities. Because my daughter owns the place. Because your family and family takes care of each other. Dad was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned about his daughter's secret life as a business mogul. I have one more question, he said finally. Ask me anything. The tiny apartment in Boston, the old car, the modest lifestyle. If you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, why do you live like you're barely getting by? I don't live like I'm barely getting by. I live simply because I prefer simplicity. The penthouse is beautiful but not ostentatious. The Porsche is a classic but not flashy. I have everything I need and most of what I want. But you could have anything. Literally anything you wanted. I have everything I want, Dad. Work that challenges me, properties that I'm proud to own, investments that create value for communities, and a family that loves me whether they think I'm successful or struggling. A family that had no idea how successful you actually are. A family that supported me and believed in me even when they thought I was making questionable career choices. That's actually more valuable than money. As the afternoon sun began to set over Westfield Country Club, casting long shadows across the 18th green where we sat, Dad reached over and took my hand. Patricia, I'm proud of you. Not because you're worth $300 million or because you own golf courses, but because you built something meaningful while staying true to your values. Thanks, Dad. That means more to me than any business success. And I'm sorry for not seeing what you were accomplishing. I should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. You should have trusted that I knew what I was doing with my life. After today, I don't think I'll ever question your judgment about anything again. As we walked back toward the clubhouse for the birthday celebration dinner that was being held in my honor, though my family still didn't know I was picking up the tab, Dad put his arm around my shoulders. So what happens now? He asked. Do we pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go back to you being my struggling consultant daughter? Now you know the truth. And hopefully we can build a relationship based on who I actually am rather than who you thought I was. Who you actually are is more successful than I ever imagined possible. Who I actually am is someone who loves her father enough to buy him a country club for his birthday. You didn't buy this place just for my birthday. I bought it because it's a sound investment that will generate good returns while providing excellent amenities for members who appreciate quality golf. But choosing this particular club at this particular time? That was absolutely about giving you the birthday present you never knew you wanted. The birthday present I never knew I wanted, Dad laughed. My own country club. Your own country club where you never have to worry about belonging because your daughter owns the place. Sometimes the best birthday gift you can give your father isn't an expensive dinner or elaborate celebration. It's the gift of revealing that all his worries about your future were unnecessary, that you've not only succeeded beyond his wildest dreams but you've done it while maintaining the values he taught you. The golf club that had slipped from Dad's hands when he learned I owned Westfield was still lying on the 18th green. I walked over and picked it up, handing it back to him with a smile. You'll need this for your next round, I said. Members get preferred tee times.